from the book of Genesis, Portraits of Christ. And as we begin the particular portrait that is before us here in the book of Genesis, we need to set up a little bit of context, if you will. In the ancient Middle East, if you had the title king, that may or may not have meant much. King of what? And many times, king was just the king, the chief of the tribe. He may have been the head of the clan. He may have been the mayor, if you will, of a village. But they gave him a title king. Now, in the process of politics in the Middle East and power grabs and things like that, some actually accumulated power and ruled over small realms and dominions and kingdoms. And so the name king could have eventually meant a very significant ruler. And so this morning we're going to be looking at several different kinds of kings and rulers in the 14th chapter of the book of Genesis. And there is one who is going to be predominant over the large, vast portion of the Middle East, including Canaan, Palestine, what is today Palestine, along that whole Jordan River Valley. This one king rules in domination. And if you can remember back when the Russian Federation was communist, that there was a strong dictator who ruled over some states, if you will, but they were all under the dominion of the United Soviet Republic. And so with that kind of thing in mind, the king that is going to come to view here in the 14th chapter is much like that dictator who ruled over and dominated all those smaller kingdoms. And then we're going to see a smaller king in the southern part of the valley. He's been part of this domination, and they have felt the abuses and just the strife that's there, and they were ready to throw off that government that was over them, and they were looking to be free and independent. And so this young king, smaller king, but willing to lead the charge, gathers 4 or 5 other kingdoms around him, and they declare their independence, and they throw off the yoke of government that was over them, and then as we go down through the story, we have another up and coming. He doesn't have a title, and he doesn't have much authority in things. He doesn't even own land. He just lives there among the people. But he's popular, and he's wealthy, and he gathers together a coalition, and they go to get involved in this mishmash in the Middle East. And so we're going to go back and read chapter 14 of the book of Genesis, but I just wanted to set it up for you in that way to help us understand it. Just before we get into our study at Genesis chapter 14, maybe you have your finger there. Turn back with me to Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen is on trial and about to be stoned. But as Stephen is giving his defense, he recalls something of Abraham. And so in Acts chapter 7, verse 1, notice what it says. The high priest said, "Are these things so?" And Stephen said, "Brethren and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, 'Get out of your country and from your relatives, and come to a land that I will show you.' And then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, God moved Abraham to this land in which you now dwell. And God gave him no inheritance in it." He didn't have a landhold. He didn't have possession of property. He was a nomad. He lived in tents. He was totally dependent on the goodwill of those around him to let him stay. He was pretty much a squatter on the land. But he moved around from place to place, and he found refuge. Notice what it says. He had no inheritance in the land, not even an heir, not so much as enough to set his foot on. And even when Abraham had no children, God promised to give it to him for a possession and to his descendants after him. But God spoke in this way, that his descendants would dwell in a foreign land, and that they would bring them into bondage and oppress them for 400 years. The nation to whom they will be in bondage I will judge, says God. And after that they shall come out and serve me in this place. Then he gave him a covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begat Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. The event we're looking at here at Genesis chapter 14 in Stephen's narrative falls in right there where it says he had no inheritance in the land, not even enough room was his to turn around in, put his foot on. And so he was a foreigner, he was an alien, but he was traveling through the land at the welcome, at the permission of those who were in the land. And so put that in mind. Just hide that little principle there in the back of your head. Here's a guy who lives in the land. He just travels around back and forth. He doesn't really own anything. And if you were going to pick a king, who would you pick? Somebody who has no part in the thing, no dog in the fight, or somebody who has ample land holdings so he could vote and rule. And so when you look at Abraham and some of the others who are going to be named here in chapter 14, Abraham seems like a rather small and insignificant. And yet God has his hand on Abraham. I want you to think about battles. We're going to see a battle. Ladies, I know you don't like World War II movies. You probably don't like cowboy Indian movies. Too much shooting, too much firing. But we have a little shoot 'em up here in chapter 14. And there's a battle that crops up, and I love early American history. I love reading about the guys who started the country. I just love reading all that stuff. And bibliographies about them, the historical record of how it all came to be. I don't know why, but that's the nature of the beast. And so this morning as we look at chapter 14, it kind of just takes me right back into that setting. And you can see these things as they're happening. So chapter 14, it came to pass in the days of, now you're going to have to forgive me, there's all kinds of ancient alien names here, and we're just going to try and deal with them as best we can. Amraphel, king of Shinar. There was Arioch, king of Elazar. There was Chedor Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. Now, that guy, Kedor Laomer, it's the hardest name to pronounce. But he's the one that's the chief. He's the one that's the dictator, has a power grab. His name comes up over and over again. He has a nation, four other kings, three other kings working together, a four-nation alliance, coalition. And he's forged this power grab, if you will, and he uses it to rule that whole Jordan River Valley, and it's expansive, and even beyond that. So we're going to see how he uses his influence. Verse 2, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom. Sodom is going to come up later in the book of Genesis. Mark him. Bera, king of Sodom. Birsha, king of Gomorrah. Shinab, king of Adamah. Shemabur, I'm just going to call him September, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Shittim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. So there's this Kedorlaomer has ruled over the whole Jordan River Valley. If you have a map, you can see it runs almost straight line north and south. Way up in the north, there's a city called Dan. From there all the way south into the Negev, that whole Jordan River Valley, and several miles away from the river valley out, he has expanded his influence, his control, and so he dominates over all those people in that river valley. And for 12 years, there was peace, they got along, and for whatever reason, in the 12th, 13th year, these five kings in the southern part, down at the base, begin to want to spread their wings and set off the rule of Kedorlaomer and find their independence and do their own thing. And so they throw off the influence and they begin a war. It says in verse 5, in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked the Rephaim in Ashtaroth. He attacked Karnaim, the Suzim in Ham, and Immon in Sheba, and so he keeps coming south, the Horites in the mountain of Seir, as far as El Paran. Keeps moving south, and all the time he's coming south, he's reasserting his power. Just so you don't forget what's going to happen down there, I'm going to give you a taste too, just to keep you guys in line. So he passes through, he takes them, reminds them that they're under his control, that they rule at his permission. Then it says in verse 7, then they turned back and came to in Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites, also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazor Tamar. And the king, verse 8, of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Adamah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim. Now they've had a couple of years to make their plan. They were under his influence for 12 years. And things got sour, and things went south, and in the 13th year, they began to set things in motion. They formed an alliance among them, these four kings. They made battle plans. They went out and practiced. They trained their armies. their little militias, their National Guard units, all of them, they had a full year to establish, set up arms, build camps, forts. They knew what they were going to do. They had a year or two to plan and prepare. And so in the 14th year, they go out to face the enemy. There's 5 kingdoms against 4 kingdoms. Might be a small advantage, if you will, with numbers. They might have better ability to get people from the homeland to fight for their homes. Chedorlaomer came south and brought armies with him. So those who were fighting with him may have come just for the spoils, but now they were engaged in a battle. In the battle for independence, we had a hard time getting guys to come out. It's just hard. Nobody really wants to fight a war. And when you put in front of you, the army that was coming was British, and most of them came from Britain, had family, had ties. So why do I want to fight the British? Except for they keep doing things that irked us, passing taxes, and trying to put their sphere of influence in this and that and the other thing. And finally, they were ready to throw off the rule of the foreign king. They were at odds. And so we see the same thing here, and it says that they were out there ready to face the armies of Chedorlaomer as they came south. And there are some natural highlights to the southern valley. If you look on the map there, everything south of the Dead Sea is what? Desert. Barren. There's not a whole lot of fertile ground. Maybe some Negev, some plains, good for pasturing sheep, low mountains. But in that southern part of the river valley, the Jordan River Valley, everything comes down and there's nowhere for that water to go. It's dead. It stops. And not only is that river encased, if you will, in the salt sea, it's salt water. It's not fresh water. And it leaches salt out of the ground. And so if you were to go to Jerusalem, go down to the Jordan River and to the Dead Sea, they tell me it's hard to swim in the water because it's so buoyant. You can't go diving down. You would have to weigh yourself down because the salt content in the water keeps you from going down. And so, actually, it's probably a good place for little kids to learn because they can float. And they're probably not going to sink, but that's the nature. And then south of that, down in the Negev, down in the desert, it says in the scripture, and that they have tar pits, asphalt pits, and one of the oil magnates, I think it was Rockefeller, when he was teaching Sunday school, J.D. Rockefeller went to church and preached and taught classes and everything. He read that and he said, you know what? If there are tar pits there, then tar further down is probably oil. And that's what made him want to go to the Middle East, and they opened up the oil exploration. So J.D. Rockefeller's reading this passage, being a geologist of a kind, decided to go there and search out and see if there truly was oil under those tar pits. But if you're a king and you're waging war and you have the home field advantage, what would you do if you had tar pits? I'd set my soldiers out in front and maybe booby trap them. You know, cover them over with a small blanket and put a little sand on it, just enough to hold it. And, you know, they come marching through, where they go? Down in the tar pit. Take out a whole company. Never fire a shot. You got to use your home field advantage. And these guys seem like, instead of using the home field advantage, they were caught by the home field advantage. Notice what it says. It says there in verse 10, now the valley of Shittim was full of asphalt or tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. The battle got hot, so they took off, ran for the hills, and the remainder, they fled and fell there. They got caught in their own tar pits. You know, how much of a bungle job do you have to do to get caught in your own tar pits, in your own traps? And so the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, they were foiled. Many ran for the hills. As soon as the shots started firing, they were done. Verse 11, then they took the kings that were coming, Chedorlaomer's coalition. Verse 11, then they took all the goods of Sodom, took all the goods of Gomorrah, all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot. Now there's an interesting thing that we didn't spend a whole lot of time on, but there was a war of a sort, civil war, a family feud, between Abraham and Lot. Abraham had brought Lot with him out of Ur of the Chaldeans up to Haran, carried him with him all the way through the land of Canaan, and while God was blessing Abraham, God was blessing Lot, God was blessing those who around them, and the influence of Abraham's obedience to God as he moved into the promised land, in the land of Canaan, as God blessed, he blessed everybody around. And Lot, as he gained influence, he got herds, he increased in goods, he had workers, he had all these things and money coming in and influence, and so he started to wrestle for control of the land for the herds. It takes a lot of green grass, it takes a lot of water, keep up herds. And so the workers, the servants between Abram and Lot, they began to fight back and forth, and Abram finally said, look, enough. You want to go one way? Pick whichever way. Look all around. Pick a way you want to go. And you take yours and go that way. And so Lot stood there and he looked around and he hemmed and hawed. He said, I don't want to leave you, Uncle Abraham. We can work this out. Abram said, nope, this is it. Cut the apron cord, you're on your own. And so Lot says, well, he saw that valley of Siddim, and he saw the village of Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, I'm going down there. Abram said, if that's where you want to go, God bless you. And so Lot moved his family away from Abram, took all his possessions, went down in the valley. And it tells us that Lot was taken out of Sodom. So he eventually moved not only down in the valley to see Sodom, but he moved close, and he kept getting closer until he was inside the gates. He was part of Sodom and Gomorrah. And later on again, we're going to see that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were sinful, and God judges them, and Lot in the process. But here, Lot is simply getting close. He's moving in among, and he's part of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they took Lot and his stuff, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, his goods, and they departed. So he is part of a hostage. He's a prisoner of war. He's taken in now he's going to be probably put out as a slave, sold into slavery, or a letter sent back to Abram, I got your son-in-law, if you want him, it's going to cost you. And so hostage plan or siege, part of the spoils of war, to be sold into slavery. All these things could have happened, were part of the day in which this war is going on. Notice verse 13. Somebody got away. They forgot to kill all the people. And it says one had escaped, came and told Abraham the Hebrew. This is the first time that Abraham has any kind of title, recognized as a leader of any kind of people, but he is known as the Hebrew. Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his house and went in pursuit. Now after the battle, Chedorlaomer gathers up spoil. He starts taking in the herds, gathers everything, people, things, herds, whatever he can take, spoils of war. And the enemy has fled off into the mountains. He's content to let them go. They've had their day. They now know that they don't want to tangle with Chedorlaomer anymore. So he's had his battle, and they've had their fill, and he's the victor. He starts wandering. Remember how intense he was as he came. He came down, and you could see the horses snorting, the camels full trot, soldiers beating a path. He's going straight for the valley of Siddim. And he's full blast on his way down. But now, he's taking his leisure. He's trotting home at a slow pace. He's got herds. He's got people. He's trying to keep them moving to get them going home. And he thinks that, I've got all the time in the world. There's nobody after us. So he was taking his leisure as he went home. And this fellow goes out, finds Abram, and he says, Abram, I alone have escaped. And they have your nephew Lot and his family, and they're carrying them away. So Abram gathers his. You never know, in the Middle East, there's all kinds of tribal conflict, there's all kinds of clans feuding one another, and so you about had to have a trained army force. You can call it a police force, you can call it militia, you can call it your armed guard, bodyguards, whatever. He has 318 of his servants that he drills periodically to keep them honed in case he's attacked. Because he has herds, he has God's blessing, he's increasing in wealth, and he has a name. He's known as Abram the Hebrew. And so it's just likely somebody's going to take a notion to attack and take those things. That's just human nature. You see somebody has something, you want it, and what's James say? Why are there wars? Why are there wars? Because somebody sees you've got something I could use, and you go over and take it. Now we call it stealing, you can call it anything you want, thievery or spoils of war, but That's why there are so many wars, because we are people who are greedy, selfish, longing for things, and instead of producing, we're just liable to take the easy route and take what you've got. And so Abram had to protect himself and his stuff. And so he has a trained, armed guard among his servants, 318. And in this thing of battles, I went online and I says, hand of God, intervention in battles. And it popped up 5 or 6 things. And so I went on one site and he had 6 different accounts where it was divine intervention. A couple of them were George Washington in the Revolution knew that it was God's intervention that protected him and his army and saved the day. He was about to be taken by the British. The British were already lined up and ready to attack the next day up in New York. And the night before the battle, a strong rainstorm in the middle of August and a huge fog in the morning. And it was so thick that you could not see 4 or 5 paces in front of you. And so through the fog, the British are trying to sort out who the people are, and they couldn't tell. They just couldn't fire a shot. You're liable to hit your own people. And Washington, under the cover of the fog, moved his whole army off in the distance and was safe. And they recognized it was the hand of God. 2 or 3 times, 4 or 5 times, all through the Revolution, God showed up and saved the Americans in their battles. I could say it's an Old Testament thing, it's an ancient people thing. You can't explain what happened any other way. So, hand of God. Except that there were 2 or 3 events during the Second World War. There was 2 or 3 things during the Israeli-Egyptian War. Here is a whole tank company of Egyptians, a small tank company of Israelis, and there's a guy wandering around pointing, hit him, hit him. and the Israelis walked away with a victory because that guy walking around among the tanks wouldn't let the Egyptians shoot. When you see wonders happening and God doing wonder things, battlefields, does God pick sides? He has a plan, he has a purpose, he intervenes in the course of human events, and so we see the hand of God at work here in this passage. Why would the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah get caught in their own traps? Why would they think, we've got massive numbers, we've got home field advantage, we can do this, we can do this, built up their confidence, and then as soon as the shooting starts, they run for the hills. God has a plan. He does things. He works in human nature, and He works in nature to work His will, and especially in overconfidence of when Gideon was going to go against the Midianites. God says, I got to do something for your army. There's too many of you. Start out with some 10,000 against 100,000. And he winnows them down. He whittles them down smaller and smaller. And he says, now I've got you where I can use you, because you know this battle is not your battle. One of the things David recognized as he went out against Goliath, Goliath had every advantage. But David said, the battle's not my battle against Goliath. What's the battle? The battle is the Lord's. Zechariah says, not by might, not by power, not by sword, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. When we are engaged in conflict, it is forever through our history a time when Americans go to church and pray. They send their men out to fight battles. They send their young people out to fight battles. And then the family comes together and meets in the church and lifts them up before God. When we put our young people in the hands of God, call upon God, surrender to God, God can do wonder things in the course of human events. And so Abram, with his 318, go in hot pursuit. When it says he went out in pursuit, the Hebrew word, I was reading Chuck Swindoll, he said it's like somebody took a knife and sharpened it and put it in the sheath, and then he drew it. When Abram went out in hot pursuit, he drew his blade. He sent his forces out to win and get Lot back. He divided his forces, and there's some surprises. Most of us don't want to divide our forces, but this is a surprise. Abram fools everybody. And he's already got a small group. A few go with him. The Amorite, Eshcol, and Aner, and they go with him to support him. And it says in verse 15, he divided his forces and then he attacked at night. That's two different surprises. First, it's a wonder he had any kind of influence with divided forces, and then he attacked at night. He and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Obath, which is north of Damascus. So if Dan was the northern part of the Jordan River Valley, they went a ways beyond that, all the way up to Damascus, and they say it's about 50 miles. So Abram brought back all the goods, and he brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. There was a total victory. How could God, Abram, a nomad, overcome such forces? Chedorlaomer. God had his way. And Abram came back. Now we're going to stop right there, because now we're going to see the picture of Christ. And the picture of Christ is in what happens as Abram comes back. But I want you to understand, this is God's doing. And when we recognize God's doing, we line up with God, He does wonder-working things just to encourage us, motivate us to stand fast and faithful to Him. Gracious God and Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the principles of truth. We thank you for your hand demonstrating your mighty power, even in the course of human events. Father, we are in a battle, and it's a spiritual battle. Our country is at a crossroads. We need a moving of your Spirit among us. We need to surrender our will, our ways to you. We need you to cleanse us from unrighteousness. We need to purify our hearts, our minds, our hands. We need to set ourselves apart. We need to let the light of truth. We need the Word of God. We need the power of the Spirit. And we ask, Father, that you would just come in among us and stir us to seek your face and do your will. We'll give you the praise and the thanks for what you accomplished in Jesus' precious name.